So we welcome everyone to this session, and as usual, the caveat of switching off your cell phones. Thank you, everybody here. Thank you.
It's us.
Yeah. I'm a little stunned by the last bit that Ramu said. We have to trace our respective journeys. It's not my journey. We are talking about Mahesh's work. I am only going to ask leading questions. That's my job today.
We'll save your journey for another day.
If I come on it. Anyway, I'd like to begin in 1990, because we have separate beginnings which came together in that year. In February 1990, I was working as arts editor in Times of India, and I used to have an arts page 4 times a week, and lots of wonderful young contributors. One of them, Sharmila Joshi, approached me and said, you know, there's a playwright from Bangalore, and he's rehearsing for a play which he's going to put up at NCPA. And do you think I should go and watch rehearsals and write about it? So I was a bit of a stickler for rules which I had myself made, because I had given birth to the arts page, so I had the right to say what went in and what didn't go in. So my rule was that plays were to be seen on the stage. Rehearsals were preparations for that final thing to happen, and pre-publicity of any kind could mislead our readers, because then the person who is interviewing is so awed by the playwright director and so completely charmed by someone like Mahesh that she comes back with a positive story about a play that might not be such a great play. So pre-publicity on my page was out, and I said so to her. She said, oh, no, I said, but she was so persuasive. I said, okay, get me the script. So she got me the script of Dance Like a Man. And I started reading it, and I ended reading it, and I knew that this is a play written by a person who is actually seeing the play as he writes and making me see it as it's written. So there was obviously not much chance of a glitch between the page and the stage. So I said to her, okay, you go and meet this playwright. We will not review it, because then there's a clash between what our pre-publicist has said and what the reviewer is saying on the same page. We can't have that. So she wrote this big piece, and I went and saw the play, and I patted myself on the back before I patted him, because I had guessed right. It was an amazing play. And this was the beginning of my acquaintance with Mahesh and with his work. Now we need to go to his beginning. So you have to tell us, don't go too far back. Not to when you were 7 years old.
Okay.
But something closer to when you began to write. And I've been reading things that you've written, I've been listening to you. And I do know that language was an extremely troublesome thing for you to work your way through. And this then became your English then became your language of expression. But there were winding ways to it, so I want you to take us down those winding ways.
Okay.
With Madurai.
Yes, okay, right from there. Well, then I will have to go back to when I was 10 years old, because that's when I saw Madurai's play.
You didn't see his Kumarni Agashi afterwards?
I did, yes.
That's
correct.
the one.
So, okay, you want me to cut to the chase. Fine. Well, by then I had begun writing for the stage, because earlier I directed my first play when I was 19. Now that may seem very impressive, but actually what we did was that a bunch of us at college decided to take a play which had a huge cast so that all the friends could take part in it, and I was pointed out as the director. That's how it, we had fun doing it, and we had full houses, because when you have 25 young people on stage, you're guaranteed that they'll bring in at least 20 people, so you will have a full house. So that's when my career as a director started, and I started writing much later. I wrote Where There's a Will in 1986. Now, that was met with a modicum of success, that people loved it, not because it was a brilliant play, which it might be, I don't know, but because suddenly they said that, oh my God, you know, we're so tired of these affected English accents and American accents. Those days, you know, you did an English play, you followed BBC news readers, and if you did an American play, it was CNN, right? So it was like, I'm talking about radio, right? So it was as basic as that. So it really got me thinking that this is what I really want. This is the way I could connect with my audience by writing plays that speak to us. So in that sense, I began in a very innocent way my journey as an Indian English playwright, right? Now, what happened once the play had an audience is that there was this whole sort of debate in letters to the editor, we didn't have blogs then, is this really English? That was one. Another saying, why was it done in English? That was the other side. And all of a sudden, I mean, I was having great fun doing the play, and I brought it to Bombay as well, so it didn't stop at just the first two shows. But suddenly, I've got these questions coming to me as to why in English on one side, and the other side is why an Indian play. So that really put me on the crossroads to great confusion. But that didn't deter me. After that I wrote Dance Like a Man. Now the question is, I wrote in English because I write in English because that's the only language I know. Now the journey with language is more to do with my journey in theatre, right? So the verbal language is just a part of it. So within that, the language of English, I think I've had my own little journey as to what I thought was English earlier, what I think English is now. And today it doesn't seem to be so much of a problem, because when youngsters speak English today, they're not as affected as we were when we started off, because we were so self-conscious about making mistakes and Indianisms right? That was a big thing, because even in school you were taught, here's a list of Indianisms, right? You don't use that. If you use that, you don't really speak the language well. So there was all this issue with language, which personally I really wasn't that keen on. What I was keen on was exploring theatre and what I can make of theatre. Even today, I'm still searching for that language, the theatrical language. And you know how it is. It's always one step forward and two back and then forward again. So it's never a journey that's linear. You're not going from place A to place B. You're going here and then you're going elsewhere, and maybe you're discovering something here. And so it is a journey, but it's not, really as straightforward as that. So to answer your question, I think the journey continues. And I think what I've come to terms with is that the journey is as important, and there is no real destination.
There's that whole political business of the colonial hangover. That is where the whole objection against English came up. And in fact, in Tara, your protagonist says, in the first scene itself, something about Indo-Anglian literature being not worth more than toilet paper. Is that right?
Yeah.
So the feeling Mahesh Dattani is extremely angry that Indian languages do not get the kind of visibility that English language literature gets.
But that's not true in the theatre, is it?
No, perhaps not.
I don't think so.
Perhaps not, yes.
Yeah.
But generally, in society and in culture, the Indian language writers feel much more neglected. And here,
I'm very surprised to hear this, because I grew up feeling a huge complex, and Mr. Girish Karnad is also one of the reasons why I have this complex, is the kind of popularity which writers of playwrights, writing in other Indian languages, the kind of standing or the kind of popularity they have is something I never got, because I write in English, in Indian English. So I find that very surprising, that maybe we're both sort of thinking in a very limited way, because ultimately you find the audience that your play speaks to.
Sure.
So I guess we have our audiences.
Yes.
And I think one really can't quantify how strong an audience ought to be before we say, I have an audience.
Yes.
I mean, we have 20 people here, that's an audience, right?
Yeah.
And I can't say, oh, if it were 2,000 people, that's an audience for me.
Yeah.
Right? So I think maybe I would like to sort of reconsider what I'd said earlier, and I'm sure Mr. L. Kunchwar might think differently today. No, he doesn't? Really?
Anyway, it's your story.
It is my story, yes. Well, I would say I'm glad I write in English, right? Not because of I have a larger outreach. I'm glad I write in English because that's what's displaced me.
Yes.
Right? And if I hadn't been displaced, I don't think I would have had the emotional stamina to compel me to write. It's a compulsion. I don't think I would have had that if I was comfortable and privileged, culturally privileged. Socially I am, but culturally, as a writer in English, I don't see myself as privileged, right? But I celebrate that lack of privilege because that's what's pushing me, and I think that's that's the fuel for my creativity.
Yeah. You know, there's another beginning which you made into theatre, it doesn't sound like a very obvious beginning because it came from dance. And it's a strange thing. You have said that your dance gurus taught you, gave you a sense of the spatial and temporal aspects of theatre. Satyadev Dubey saw Martha Graham dance, and his entire idea of choreography in theatre changed. And for that moment, the play he was working on, he found a solution for the problem that he was struggling with. So dance and theatre somehow seem to do things for each other. So you didn't go on to be a dancer, but it gave you something.
My theatre, absolutely, and I really have come to a point where I don't draw a distinction anymore. I just think that theatre is dance with an intention. I think the minute you put an intention to how you're using space, it is theatre. For me, learning Bharatanatyam was all-encompassing because I think that is a complete theatre form. If you look at classical theatre, of course, I didn't have the privilege of learning Kathakali or Kodiyattam because those, everyone says that is really complete theatre. But so is Bharatanatyam. If you look at it, you have, you know, the rich text, and most important, at least what I got out of Bharatanatyam was the spatial temporal sort of exploration. And my gurus always used to tell me that I've got to be aware of that everything is repeated 3 times in Bharatanatyam, right? Because that's the way the space, the temple space was structured. You had an audience that was so you do one sort of Aduvu on this side, and then you do it this way, and then you do it this way, right? So that's how you sort of take it. And something which my gurus said, and it stayed on, although I don't think it started with my gurus because I read it elsewhere as well, is that one of the things is that you follow with your eyes, right? And they say that where the hand goes, yes,
your eye
go. And where the eye goes, the mind goes, and where the mind goes, you go.
Yeah.
Right? So
the bhava goes your.
Yes,
yep.
Exactly, right, the soul. So I think that kind of integration really made me an artist, right? Now, I'd written Where There's a Will before I wrote Dance Like a Man, right? After I wrote that, I took to dance in a bigger way, right? I wasn't too sure about pursuing theatre, that although there was this thing, at one point I was seriously considering pursuing dance. If you look at dance, and you've sort of endorsed the script, that you could see, and you know, it's very interesting you say that when you read it, you could see it, right? For me, I wrote it because I could see it. And I think that's why Dance Like a Man is a more accomplished piece than Where There's a Will. That when I wrote Where There's a Will, I didn't see it. And subsequent to Dance Like a Man, unless I see it, I can't write it.
Yeah. Actually, that leads me to a question that I've been thinking about with regard to your work. It has to do with how you organize space on the stage. It's always multi-levels. It is something that allows connection between different spaces on a level, between the interior and the exterior, between past and present. Plus, it allows you to intercut. It happens in a couple of your plays that someone is talking on the phone here, and someone else is acting out her own scene there. And there's this intercutting. So there is this kind of spatial sense that you create. Now my question again, I'll relate it to what Tendulkar said. For Tendulkar, he thought of characters first, and it was only when those characters began to speak to him in their own voices, of their own volition, where he felt that he wasn't going to be pulling strings, that they were going to move and speak on their own. When he came to that point, he thought he was ready to write a play. When I read your plays, it strikes me that perhaps it is this spatial organization of the stage that is your starting point, and not so much the characters or even perhaps the plot, though you may have them in mind, but unless you see them moving in this kind of organized space, your writing can't.
Absolutely. To me, in a sense, space is character. I think I have to figure out what this person is doing in these spaces, and that's how I discover my character. So what you said about Mr. Tendulkar, I think that's true, but that's not my starting point. For me, yes, that if I can activate my characters, they will compel me to complete their journey. For them, it sounds a little sort of lofty, I know, but that's the way it is, that in a sense the characters do complete your work for you, and where the contrivance comes in, all you could do is hide it with craft. You would know where you have contrived to take the story, and you know where your characters have driven it, and when you re-look at your work, you know the moments where your character has driven it. Those are the moments that really work like magic.
Yeah. Moving from your so-called comfort zone, which you had created by then, because you had your own group in Bangalore, Playpen. You had an audience there. At some point, you even had a little studio theater. I remember visiting it.
Yeah.
So you pretty well set up in a way. Before Bravely Fought the Queen, or after, I'm not sure.
I think it was after.
After. But what interests me is that you directed this play, Bravely Fought the Queen, in London, Leicester.
Yes, Leicester Haymarket Theatre.
Haymarket.
Yes.
So you're working with actors who came from a different kind of thinking about theatre, different kind of training in theatre. And your co-director says somewhere that you understood where they were coming from, and actually, he says, you recreated the text in order to be able to draw them into it. Now that's a fascinating experience, I think. So.
It was, and I actually that was the first time I worked in a professional setup with professional actors. So it was a first time for me as far as that was concerned. But I had a real task that I was the co-director, right? So it wasn't just a learning experience for me. I was expected to give something, and to me.
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
Yes. The key word he uses is that these actors were were trained to find the subtext and go according to the subtext.
Yes, yes, that's right. I'm glad you brought up the word subtext, because this is where the problem came up, is that the subtext going in my head and the ones going in their head, suddenly there was a huge disparity, right? Now, for example, there's a scene where he just says, sit down, right?
Yes.
And she sits down, right? Now, to me, the subtext is very clear, you know. He says, sit down, because you're my wife and you're a mere woman, right? But then the question suddenly comes up, why does she sit down? You know, and I say, because he asked her to, you know. Yes, but why does she sit down, you know? And then finally I said, because she's a mere woman, you know. That's the whole point of the play, you know, that it's bravely fought the queen, you know, and that's her battle. And then suddenly it sang, oh my God. So now they had to start from there, that, okay, that's where these women are coming from, and now where are they going? And suddenly the journey became interesting to them. But another way I could recreate the text for them was that because they were so questioning about the subtext, right? I discovered how verbose my play was. So it was possible for me to edit.
You actually
edited it.
you
because
cut your own precious words.
I did, because there was something even more precious coming out, which was subtext.
Oh, wow.
So for me, that was the time when I realized, I mean, I teach them subtext as if, oh, you know, I was born with it in my mouth, you know, but this is, you know, so for me, that was a growth in my writing. And also the other thing is how I could, now in the play, I'll just sort of keep it short because I don't want to sort of bore everyone with the story, is that there is this character Ba who is paralyzed, and so as a result of her stroke she has dementia, right? Now throughout the play she's on a bed, right? And she's sort of bringing things from memory, and she doesn't know what is the past and what is the present, and she confuses whichever daughter-in-law comes in to a friend she had in the past, and she has these very comic fights with them, but actually it's a fight from the past and things like that. Now, what Michael suggested was that because it was a black box space, slightly bigger than this, right? It was like, I think it was 180 seater or something, the Leicester Haymarket, the black box, not the main auditorium. What he did was he put sand on the periphery of the set, right? And I thought it was a ridiculous idea, right? Because I thought he was Indianizing it, because he put garbage, he put like cigarette packs, and he put foil over there, and he put a beady stuck somewhere. And I said, oh God, okay, here we go. This is what they want, right? But suddenly I could see where, I mean, I told him to get rid of all that stuff. But Ba started moving, right? Now, in reality, she is paralyzed. She's stuck, right? And when she goes, she begins to sift through this sand and begins to find props in it, which send her on this memory thing. And suddenly I saw the magic, and everything that my dance gurus had said suddenly made sense. And I think that was the first time I could connect it with playwriting. I mean, I thought I grew as a director as a result of learning Bharatanatyam. But then at that moment, that's when I realized that yes, as a playwright, I could do something that's so dance-like, and yes, it can be a piece of theatre.
See, it's very interesting that you managed it this way because you were open. You weren't saying, no, this is how I've written the play and this is how it shall be. We were in Berlin long ago, 1992 or so. There was this Festival of India going on in various places, and Germany was then the spot. And Girish's play, Nagamandala, was being done. And Vijay Mehta had directed it here.
Yes, but was it Vijay? Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes, yes.
And then she was invited to direct the German production. And after the show, we were sitting around, actors talking, and the actor who played the husband, who then becomes a snake, and he was a fantastic snake, he was talking about his experience. And he said, we found it very difficult to begin with to understand what Mrs. Mehta wanted from us. And then at some point we realized that if the script said she cries, or if it is implied that she cries, then the girl, the actor, was expected to cry. And this actor was saying, that's not our training. We always take the opposite solution in order to intensify the idea of her being full of tears and not bringing them out. So that intensity is lost if there's a kind of one-to-one correspondence between the word and the action. So what Vijaya did was to say to them, okay, your training is different. I will organize your movements after you tell me what you want to do with them, and that's how they got this production done. So she wasn't able to cross into their zone. That was a problem.
Yeah.
But you, as a writer-director, doing your own play, you were able to open out and allow them to come in as you went in.
Right. I think, yes, you use the right word. I'm open. And of course, that can be a disadvantage as well. But I find that looking at it selfishly, being open means that I'm the richer one.
Yeah.
I'm enriched, and I would like to believe the work is enriched as well. Like even now when I'm working with my students, like I come with an idea, a fixed idea, and say that this is how I want to approach the scene, and the students come up with something and they say, we want to do it this way, just see us first. And then when I see them, I've even forgotten what I came with, and I work on that and say, okay, that's what happened with the Martys today, that they were set. I came all prepared to do the scene to which we were having a challenge with, right? And they had prepared as well, and they said, let's show you what we've got, right? And then before I knew it, I was picking on that and rearranging things so that, okay, this seems to work, let's strengthen this and all that. And by the end of it, I'd forgotten. I said, okay, let me see their version and then I'll do mine, right? But after that, I completely forgot what I'd come with. But I think that's also to do with the art of theatre, isn't it? That it's so sort of fluid that the minute you try to set it or crystallize it, it's dead.
Yeah.
And I think it's the fluidity, which I constantly use the word plasticity in class. I think that, to me, that's what makes theatre live in the best sense of the word.
Yeah. But with all your commitment to theatre, you've also made forays into different forms of expression. I mean, I was stunned when I realized that you'd also done radio plays.
Ah, yes, yeah.
So BBC says do radio play, and you do radio play? Is that simple?
Yeah. It was precisely at that moment when we did Bravely Fought the Queen at the Leicester Haymarket, and then we took it to London after that. It had a 3-week run in London, and this very sort of quiet and unassuming gentleman I used to smoke then, so I was out on the the outer cafe, having a smoke, and he comes up and says that, I'm so-and-so from the BBC, and would you be interested in writing a radio play for us? Because this was the 50th year of Indian independence, and he said, we've asked Mr. Karnad, and he's agreed. And I said, yes, I'd love to do it. So Girish wrote Sword of Tipu Sultan, and I wrote a play called Do the Needful.
Okay.
Right? Now, it's not as simple as that do radio play, and I say yes, and then when I thought about it, I said, now what, right?
Yeah.
So I called him, and of course we'd arranged to meet, so I went to the BBC and met him, and I said, I've never written a radio play before, and he said, it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be easy, right? And he said, but we're here to guide you, right? So the first thing he said is that, you have freedom in radio. You could go where you want, right? He said, that's the freedom you have, but you also don't have a captive audience, right? Which means that your listener could be driving a car, could be ironing their clothes, could be, doing something else, and they have the choice to turn off the radio, right? Whereas in the theater, they will patiently wait for you to arrive at some dramatic moment, right? That was the scary part. And to cut a long story short again, to me, I've written screenplay, I've written stage play, I've written radio play. The most difficult is the radio play. Because the first assumption I made was that it's about dialogue, right? That you write lines and you say it all in the words, and that it's so weak and ineffective, whereas actually it's about soundscapes.
Sounds.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think a good radio play gives those soundscapes, and the words are part of the soundscape. So it was a huge learning experience, and even today, I don't think I will go back to writing for radio. Because it's way too difficult.
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And of course, I chose the detective format precisely for that reason, because the BBC commissioned me year after year.
Yes.
So I created.
You did some 4 plays?
I
3
did
plays?
7.
Sorry.
Yes. So these are full-length plays, which went from Radio 4 to World Service, and then there were repeats as well.
Gosh.
So clearly. The detective format worked the best. And it was very interesting that when I published them, the commissioner, Jeremy Mortimer, I asked him to write the foreword, and he did. And he said that every story is a detective story.
You hadn't noticed.
Yeah. No, he said every story told is like a detective story.
Okay.
Yes, because there is a mystery, there is a conundrum, and then how does it come out in the open? So it's either the character doesn't know, so it's a journey of discovery, or people don't know, so it's still a journey of finding out.
Right. And that catches the audience.
Yes, exactly.
The listener.
Yeah.
But you also put, now I won't give numbers, I thought it was one play, radio play onto the stage.
More than one, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did that then, what did you need to do in order to transfer it to the stage?
The 2 things which I think that I have yet to learn, one is adapting my radio play to stage, and the other is adapting my stage play to film.
I'm coming.
Sorry, I stole
you
your
carry
thunder.
on. No. You please carry on.
Because one play, Clearing the Rubble, which I wrote about, it's basically 3 monologues, right? Now, I decided to adapt it for the stage, right? And it reeked of radio-ness. It had the soundscape, and I used sound effects to create that, but visually it was a very boring piece. So it wasn't really theatre in that sense. Just a few months ago, a young director in Bangalore, fresh out of all this physical acting, when I heard these things about schools of physical acting, my response, but isn't all theatre physical? You know, then why this physical? But then I realized, you know, how interesting and different it is. And he did Clearing the Rubble. He did not change a word, but it was a piece of theatre. What he did with the movements and the sort of abstract quality he got to the scenes, I just held my breath. It worked.
I see.
And I think that is that's a learning for me. That I think the hardest thing for me to let go, and this is something I always tell my students, is let go, is when you've constructed a piece as a writer, to break that, fracture it completely and rediscover, you know, you're a playwright as well. It's the toughest thing to do. And that's what switching from one medium to another requires you to do, is to fracture it and put it back together again.
What you just said about this other young person doing the same play and turning it into theatre has removed a little doubt that I've been carrying in my mind with regard to Andha Yug.
Ah, okay. What's your doubt?
Which was a radio play.
Yes.
I saw it as a stage play. It was magnificent. And I said to myself, oh, can't have been much of a radio play. But obviously the director, Dubey, understood what your young director understood and managed to make a possibly very good radio play into a very good stage play.
Yeah, I would say I haven't heard the play. I've seen Andha Yug, and it's a brilliant piece of theatre, undoubtedly. Yeah. But now that you mention it, I could see how it can be very static if not done by a director with a vision in the right sense of the word.
Right.
Yeah.
So you sneaked in films.
Yes.
Please carry on.
Ah, okay. Well, film, you know, happened quite by chance, but I grabbed it. When the chance came, I grabbed it, right? Pamela Rooks, who unfortunately is no more, we had a mutual friend, Pratima Bedi, who was our mutual friend, God bless her. Now, out of this blue, I get this call from Pratima, and she was at Nityagram, right? And I'd been there often, and she always thought what a horrible dancer I was, because she'd seen me when I was learning, And she said, oh, I'm so happy you gave up dance. And I said, yes, I think the whole world is happy I gave up dance, you know. And so she said, you know, Pamela has been trying to get in touch with you, and why don't you come and meet her, right? I said, yeah, sure, I would love to, because she'd done Train to Pakistan. So I knew of her. And, you know, I also knew that she and Lilette were very good friends, right? And Pratima mentioned she was interested in Dance Like a Man. And Lilette already had a successful tour of Dance Like a Man. I said, yes, I'd love to meet her and all that. I was so in awe. I mean, all these women, whether it's Pratima or Pamela or Lilette or you or something, you just leave me completely sort of speechless. And
you're okay with me?
No, well, now after 30 years. But I have another version of the Times of India editorial story.
Yes, okay.
It's a bit of a gossip, but I'm sure we all enjoy that. So that's how a film happened, and she said, I'll co-write the script, because you haven't written screenplay, I'll co-write the script. And I said yes, right? And then, of course, I feel the screenplay was a disaster, but she managed to salvage it as a film, because she got it some wonderful actors, and there's some beautiful dance sequences in it. But the wordy scenes, to me, they don't work at all. And had I sort of told her, just do the screenplay with a professional screenwriter, I think it would have been better.
Yeah.
But this is what I mean about enriching myself. I learned through the mistakes which she was credited for, but I learned from that. So when this friend of mine, an industrialist, selling aeroplanes, decides I'm a movie buff, so let's get together and make a movie. And okay, let's make a movie in 1 crore. Now this was 20 years ago. That was a huge sum.
Yeah.
So I said, let's do that. And so he said, okay, so now what? And he was sort of impulsive, so he said, no, let's start something right away. Let's plan and all that. And he said, what about one of your plays, right? And I thought, okay, here's my time to pitch in on a muggy night in Mumbai, right? Now that's a play with a very, very overt gay theme, right? Now the play wasn't received well because the time wasn't right and people thought it was a bit of a...
May I intrude?
Yes. Yeah.
The play wasn't received well because your director made it into a comedy.
Yes.
Which it was not.
Yeah.
Okay, carry on.
Let's not get into that because my students are going to ask me more about that, which is going to put me on a sticky wicket because I'm still working with that director, as you well know, right? So I thought that the time is right? Now, he also liked the idea because he said, okay, let's sort of work on this. And then I approached actors. Interestingly, Atul Kulkarni was very open. He said, this is wonderful, this is breakthrough material, And he said yes. And I had, approached other people, and I'd rejected some. Randeep Huda had auditioned for it. I rejected him because I felt he was bringing too much attitude. And of course, later on, we joked about it. He's a wonderful actor now. He was just starting off then.
What happens when a playwright decides to write for the screen, he has in mind the possibilities that cinema offers of breaking out into the outdoors. So instead of keeping the whole thing confined, he had outdoor scenes, all sorts of things happening, and it just lost its intensity. And let's go a little higher. What about Salman Rushdie? Who also insisted on writing the screenplay for Midnight's Children and
he
created
also
a
insisted
hash.
on writing the stage play of Midnight's Children, which he made a hash of.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
See, you don't even know
No,
about
I
it.
didn't know
That's
about
how
that.
bad it was.
So basically, I think playwrights, unless they move very far away from their material and they're willing to shed everything about the original play and reconstruct, I don't think they should do this.
That's right. Well, you have to be a different person. You can't rely on your skills as a playwright. You have to acquire the skills of a film writer.
That's right.
That is a learning process.
You talked about the language of theatre. There's a language of cinema.
Absolutely.
And the two are very different. Even in terms of performance.
Yeah. Completely. Completely. Yeah.
So, but will you make another film?
I will, and I did, because I think where I succeeded is with Morning Raga, because that wasn't a play, it was an original. When the project came to me, immediately I said, I'm not going to touch my plays. I'm going to write a fresh screenplay.
Right.
And that was when I understood the language I understood. I don't say that I've acquired the language of cinema. That was the understanding. It took me 2-3 films to understand the language of cinema. And that's an expensive learning process.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
cheap, as you, yes, yeah.
Unless you have people who make aeroplanes backing you.
Well, yeah, but it's still, yeah, it's at the expense of somebody else, which is also not a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, I was lucky I had a friend who sold aeroplane parts, so I guess that helps.
Yeah.
That always helps, I think. Yeah, I expect all of you to be rich so you could support my theatre in your old age, but I'm old.
But coming to your place back, it's your characters are what in Marathi we would say character. You know, they're characters. So I'm really fascinated by your patriarchs, these nasty control freaks that you've created. And your father wasn't like that.
No, he wasn't.
So where do you get these old men from?
Well, I think if you look at my overtly patriarchal plays, like Where There's a Will, Dance Like a Man, Bravely Fought the Queen, it's the missing patriarch in that. And even Tara, because again it's the missing patriarch, the ghost of the patriarch. To me, I think they're not real people. They're symbols of a system. Right? So in that sense, they're not mean old men. They're just mean old society. Right? So if you look at it from a woman's perspective or a gay perspective, these are mean old men. Right?
Yeah.
So I see them as more representational of society. That's why when I wrote On a Muggy Night in Mumbai, I decided to do away completely with this father symbol of patriarchy. I just put it as a wedding that's happening downstairs. That became the symbol of patriarchy, where the music from the wedding is so overpowering that they can't have a conversation and express their true feelings. So that became the the sort of the demon of patriarchy coming down. So I think if you see that either there are two ways of doing it, because when I directed a play of dance, a production of Dance Like a Man in Canada, I decided let me revisit this play. I don't want to have this nasty old man, right? So I made him an unhappy man, right? And I made him actually love his son. So to him, it was an act of love to wean him from dance, to keep him away from dance. So then I think it's taken a lot of time for me to discover enough humanity to see the other side of things. See, because I'm not a patriarch, I don't have children, right? Neither was my father in that sense, because he was quite a bit of a free spirit himself, right? So it's really society, in a sense, which is such an amorphous term, because you and I could be society. It doesn't have to be. Yeah. So in that sense, I think it's. If you look at these things as metaphors, then I think you discover the truth. But if you see them as characters, they're seriously limited. I'm talking about the father figure in my plays, right?
Yep.
And I think because when I did try this, I had to edit some of the lines to make it fit into this. So I think, again, that's the beauty of theatre, right? You could take your script and you can rewrite it, right? So it is possible. And I think this question about where did these nasty old men come from, I think they're just a figment of my imagination.
Yeah, there's a lot of evil in your imagination.
Well, I think I attribute the evil to other people. I'm always good in my imagination.
You are, yes, of course. But it always stuns me that here's this Mahesh that I know, and these characters are from his mind. Ugh. But to come to the real ugh characters in your life, critics.
Ugh, okay, now that's evil. That's really evil. Okay.
So how have they?
Exceptions, of course.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
So how have they, by and large, dealt with your plays, and how have you dealt with them?
With difficulty, yeah. They haven't been very kind to me. Of course, some have, right? Some, and they do fawn on me because they find something different, maybe. I don't know. And I think the true merit of my writing, I think it's only when I'm dead and gone, it's going to show. So then I don't care what people think then, because I won't be here. But I think having arrived at this stage, I'm glad for these critics, because there were obvious pitfalls that I couldn't see, right? One was overwriting, right? Now, earlier on, the critics said, and then we had to suffer this wordy scene, right? Now, I would just rubbish. They don't know what they mean, and they don't know genius when even if genius slaps them in the face and all that stuff, right? I may be right to some extent, but having come to a certain point, I think it was helpful.
Yeah.
Right? Because today, even when I do scenes with them, I actually edit. Even Lorca, I edit. Right? Because I feel the good acting can do so much more.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been a learning journey, and I think this is why I continue to do theatre, because I see it as much as a learning process as it is as creating something.
Yeah, I think that Final Solutions showed you two sides of theatre, an audience and the critic. And I don't think there's ever been such a huge difference between these two responses. Final Solutions, you had tremendous support from your audience, I think.
Absolutely, yes.
And the critics weren't kind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was for me a vindication. Because critics, one Bangalore critic said something so stupid that I didn't even feel it was worth responding to. This critic said that because he is a working class Muslim man, how can he be so aware of his thoughts?
Oh,
Right? Now that's stupid, isn't it?
it is stupid.
Right. I'm glad you agree.
Yep.
Right? So you're a smart critic.
I am.
Yeah, you are. Well, she likes me, doesn't she? So she has to be smart. So that's when I realized that if I have my limitations, so do the critics, right? I wish there was some way. I mean, the only dialogue I've had with a critic is with you, right? And for me, that has been something I cherish.
So we shall end on this note
Yes.
of huge agreement.
Yes, boring but loving, yeah.
Now I believe they have to ask questions, eh?
Yeah.
That's you.
Ah, okay.
Right.
Well, fire away, yes.
Sir, in terms, as ma'am mentioned, that you take inspiration of your plays majorly from the space. So is it like, how do you get to a space particularly? Is it from somewhere you have been in real life, or is it something like, maybe if this is a black box and you want to put this space on the stage, so do you like, how do you see it? Like, you'll put the space as it is, or like, for example, it has two fans over there with a crack on that wall. So how realistic are you in terms of space if you want to put a real space onto the stage?
Well, I think that's why I prefer the black box, because you can make anything of it. You could use the crack or you can ignore it. It's up to you what you want to do with it. I think for me, space is more to do with how characters use space, right? For me, you know, when I decided to do Yarma with you guys, for me the earth was speaking, right? The open fields were speaking, the Andalusian mountains were speaking, right? Then when you guys did the research, there was something about that, the fact that it's an open space, but on the farms there are these embankments, and what they use is just a narrow, so you've got these narrow, straight and narrow paths, but the space is very open. So in the sense you have the expanse, but you also have the constriction, right? So for me, that was when the characters spoke, that this is how they walk. Right? This is their journey into this space, right? So in a sense, it's a little more abstract than sort of creating realistic spaces, but also I've done realistic spaces too. Like I did this, what we call in Bombay commercial drama, right? I did Double Deal with Ashwin Gadwani. Now that's your conventional box space, right? It's like, it's a realistic space. Now for me, I could only see the characters living when I understood the driveway and the lonely road on Mud Island, which they stopped their car. So I sort of extended the space a little bit so that they could see. Added, you know, acoustics of them speaking far away, and I use the window so they're constantly looking out and things. So for me, having given that as a professional, I need to make it work, but at the same time as an artist, I need to find my own expression in that. So for me, the characters were already living and breathing and doing things, and but how do I make them? How do I make them the way I want them to work? So for me, then the space is something that that would help me with that. Yes.
So in the play Final Solutions, considering a character like Ba, wherein you've written her character in the present and the past, so how did you go about that? Did you write the whole present first, past first, or together?
Well, I think the past informs her in the present, and I did not write them separately. I wrote them as memory, that at this moment, what would she recall? Right, so it was, but a lot of that inspiration came of Ba as a young bride of 16. A lot of it came from what my mother told me about her hometown, right? So, and she was a huge fan of movies, and she loved, you know, heroines of that time, like, you know, Noor Jahan, and she used to listen to film songs. So that was really the starting point for Daksha, right? But to answer your question, I didn't write them separately because for me the past had to sort of inform the present, so I stayed with the present, and I said, okay, this time if she is recalling, what is it she is recalling, right? And then of course in redrafting you structure it so that it segues one into another. That's a craft, but originally that's how I approached it. Yes, yeah.
महेश, जैसे लास्ट पॉइंट जो मैम कहा था कि क्रिटिक्स का क्या रोल है आपकी लाइफ में, सिंस यू हैव हैड अ लॉन्ग करियर, कि इट इज नेवर अ डायलॉग, क्रिटिक कुछ बोल के चले जाते हैं, जैसे शांता मैम वाज एन एक्सेप्शन लाइक यू सेड. सो एज एन एक्टर आल्सो इट इज लाइक बहुत डिफिकल्ट है कि हाउ टू टेक दैट, लाइक हाउ टू जज दैट. ओके, जैसे आपने कहा कि स्टार्टिंग में आपको लगा कि दे डोंट नो, इट इज मी हु वांट टू डू, आई वांट टू ट्राई इट. सो जैसे हमारे साथ भी ऐसे इन आवर स्पेस आल्सो व्हेन वी वर्क एंड लाइक कोई हमारा दोस्त कुछ कहता है कि अच्छा नहीं, देन वी फील कि ओके व्हाट आई एम डूइंग, ट्राइंग, आई जस्ट वांट टू डू. हाउ टू टेक दैट कि वो फीडबैक दे रहा है एंड देन सेंस इट कि ओके आई थिंक दिस इज समथिंग व्हिच इज कंस्ट्रक्टिव, this is something which is not constructive and they should have a limit or something. So how was your journey to understand that कि, okay अब ये शायद मुझे help करेगा और ये नहीं है मेरे लिए.
Yeah. See, that's something you getting angry at responses is natural. If you are a creative person, you are sensitive, right? And damned if there's an artist who says, I don't care about critics. We all care about critics, and we all want positive, because understand them to come from an informed position, right? So their opinion does matter. So it does hurt when they say bad things about your creation, right? Just embrace it. I know it's easy to say because I haven't yet embraced it myself. But the thing is that stay with what you believe in. That's very important, right? But inform yourself, because what you believe in may be limited, because you as a person are limited. Right? I am, as a person, am limited, right? So how do I expand myself first? Is to deal with how others perceive you, right? So one way I look at it is, okay, I sort of safeguard my ego by saying that's one person's opinion. It may be informed, but it's still one person's opinion, right? But now let me think about what this person thinks of my work. Right, and it is a process of selection. Right, now there's no rule as to what you take and what you reject. That's entirely up to you. Right, because I think a lot of great writers are great because they rejected critics, and a lot of great writers are great writers because they listen to their critics. So there's no rule. Right, it's ultimately how strongly do you believe in what you're doing. Right? Now, having said that, it is a craft as well, right? So, if your critic is saying that I didn't get that at all, you know, or this seemed so boring, you have to wonder, why was it boring? Right? Why is it that what you wanted to do didn't come across? Because unless you put it out there, and if you put it out there, the critic doesn't like it, I think that's great, because that's also a response. Hating something is also a response. But if they don't get what you were doing, then you seriously need to think about what are you putting across. Right? So having said that, I really don't have an answer to your question. It's always, you'll have to take each case as a one-on-one thing.
But there's something that can happen and should happen, and I have experienced it, where the person, whether it's an actor or a playwright or a director, gets in touch with me. See, if I'm writing a critique, I have X number of words in which to put in what I feel. I try my best to substantiate what I'm saying in order that you and the readers understand where I'm coming from. And I could be coming from a totally different space than you. But if I have made it clear in my writing, then you know where you stand vis-a-vis my position. But if you get in touch, the most recent example was this Bangalore actor Sharanya, who did Yakshagana. Yeah, Akshayambara. And I wrote about this play. I was fascinated by it as an experiment and the way that it worked. The point was that the male actor, was a professional, and she was entering a new form, and she had taken on the male character. And if you think of the whole line of fantastic male actors who've done female impersonations, and you try and tally that with what she was trying to do, you realize where she wasn't quite making it. So I had pointed this out, and as you said, as an artist, she was very upset, and she emailed me and asked me what I had meant. So we got into a long dialogue, back and forth, at the end of which she at least understood what I had meant. So, you know, in your own head, that basically is what you want. You want to understand what that other person is talking about. And then you can tally it with what you have done. And you can say, okay, that's no use to me. Or you can say, that is something I need to think about.
I think ma'am has hit the nail on the head, is that how could you reject something you haven't understood, fully understood, right? So until you can understand it, you can't accept or reject it.
So on that note, like critique is a professional person who is writing something about a piece of text which has been written by some person which comes from a particular background. Say I heard a story about Yayati when it had to be performed in USA, and actor said that why will he give up for father, because that tradition we have in India, not in
Yeah.
there. So, and then like you also told one story about your play and you changed it. So if they don't understand it, so the critiques also, if they don't understand like a experimental play like Akshayamra, like you said, so the artist who is trying to do, if he or she is bringing something from a different context, और वो समझ में अगर वहाँ पे bridge is missing, so how do you take that? Actually यहाँ पे दो questions है. एक तो once you bring that text on stage, and after that the dialogue which happens, and also before when you take your text to actors who don't understand that, so you changed it for your play, but how much is that like?
Well, it's a change is again, I would use the word accessible, right? Now, ultimately, you are doing your theatre for your audience, right? Now, if your actors are coming from the same culture as your audience or a similar culture, right? Now, the play was done in Germany, right? Now, you've got to honor that, right? You don't want to do a museum piece, say this is the way we do theatre in India. They'll say, oh, how cute, how sweet, a clap and all that. You don't want that either, right? You want them to say, how can they do this? How can a son obey his father so blindly? That question itself is a communication. Right? For example, when I did Chokher Bali with the students at Columbia, right? They had the same question: is that how could she just sort of expect her friend to trust her friend and push her friend into her husband's chamber and not expect something. Now, they come up from a background where you don't introduce your girlfriend to your current boyfriend because they may hook up, right? Now, that's the frame they're coming from as 19-year-old undergrads. That's what they're thinking, right? So you've got to then create a path for them to understand that, look, this is a question of trust, right? That in a culture where there is a sense of decorum on how to speak to your sister, your friend's husband, or how do you speak to your wife's sister, right? There is a form of address, right? And it's these forms that are broken in the play, and that's what makes the story very interesting, is that this widow is discovering her sexuality, right? That's what the play is about. So there were some things they could relate to, some not, right? And this is where it's very important to have dramaturgy, right? This is completely missing in the kind of theatre we do. Time? Okay. Any more questions?
Let's have a protocol thing.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, thank you very much. It's always a joy to listen to these conversations, and one is sort of honored at the level of discourse. And please, we have two small gifts. I first request Shruti, if you can come and hand this over to Mahesh. So this is from the DSM. It's a lovely book that Tulika has published. It's about 17th century Delhi and monuments and memoirs.
Okay,
It's
thank
a little
you.
tough to
Thank
read,
you.
But it's a joy. And
Thank you.
Ashwin, if you can come and give a copy to Shanta, right? Please
Thank
buy
you.
a copy of the
Thank
book
you.
as well. Yeah. and I'll just quickly run through some shows and performances that are subsequent.
take
The next
this off,
DSM is Atul Pethe, that's on 10th of March, so that will be Atul Pethe, and in conversation with him will be Parna Pethe and Kalyani Mule, so that should be again interesting. Then we have two shows, one is on the 17th, which is Museums of Species in Danger, that is by Rasika Agashe, and then on 24th of February is Biryani. And then in addition to that, we have a student production which is directed by Mahesh Dattani. That's on 3rd of March, 4th of March and 9th of March. And would you want to tell us what it is?
Yes, it's an adaptation of Lorca's Yadma, and it's called Mati, set in rural Haryana.
Super. And we have two workshops, which is 22nd and 23rd of February is the Commedia della Art, and I hope I get this right, Marco Ziello. Is that right? Okay. And 19th and 23rd March is Amay Mehta, which is Foundation Skills in Acting, plus Movement and Improvisation. And before I sort of conclude, thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. And we are on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and this conversation video will be on YouTube, so please share. And if you could review us on Facebook and Google, and for old-fashioned people like me on postcards. Yeah. All right, thank you very much both of you, and
Thank
please
you.
keep coming.
Thank you, Rahul.